Or you hit record or whatever.
You know.
I'm gonna put in my ears here so I can hear. Otherwise, I'm like, what?
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like Allegra.
What's the weather outside?
Down here,
65.
it's stormy down here. We've had some rain and some storms moving in.
Oh, okay.
How about you?
It's been cold the last 2 days, 3 days. It's been probably, but yesterday I didn't get above freezing and it was in the teens at night. Today it got up into the, I think it reached close to 50, and it's going to get into the, maybe around freezing at night. So it's good sugaring weather still up here. Maybe this probably is the last of it if things progress the way that the forecast is going. So
I think we've got one more freeze, like maybe Thursday. I say one more, you never know. But it looks like an extended forecast that it'll probably get a frost, like 32 degree, low Thursday evening, I think. And then it kind of lightens up. So I'm thinking, I'll probably start grafting here pretty quick. I keep saying that, but last week I started my every Monday off, like through end of March, April, May, and half of June. And like I'm trying to get moving, and I tied off a bunch of crap for school. So most of that's out of the way. And I just hot wax dipped equipment this last.
do you have a little tank that you're doing that?
Yeah, I wish I had a big tank, but I do have a little tank. It takes a while, but
how many supers can you fit in your tank?
Really only like one deep at a time.
But you get a drink a few beers and dip some equipment.
Yeah. Actually, I was just branding the whole time. Well, I say the whole time, most of the time. I didn't get all of it dipped, but I hot branded everything. But yeah, that would be a good time for that. For
Yeah.
So how's your bees looking?
Oh, good. A whole lot. It's funny. I've been saying it doesn't take a whole lot to improve upon what I saw last spring.
Really? Well, I know last time we talked, you were anticipating.
It was It was everything. It was. If you could, as a beekeeper, especially from a small commercial operation like myself, where my income, where I'm making my income's coming from my bees. It was like the worst case scenario. But here's the thing. Throughout this whole process, it seems like everybody wants to hide their losses and kind of hide behind some sort of like, it's not as bad, or they kind of hide behind. It's like almost like it's a shameful thing. And let me tell you, as a farmer, there's nothing grand in like complete failure of your livestock. Like, and especially since like we're beekeepers, like, bees are, especially if you're farming with bees, it's a form of livestock, but it's like, there's nothing fun to say, I lost all my lives. I lost my ability to be productive. But looking back on it now, I learned so much. I guess it's almost like if you took queen rearing, if as a beekeeper that is just coming into beekeeping, you're in your second, third year, and you know everything about bees, and you want to start raising queens, like what queen rearing will do to your ability to become a better beekeeper. Like I found by having my apiary completely, I shouldn't say this, it was a 90% mortality. Pretty much. It's like 80, it was in the high 80s, close to, by it all, I just say 90 because we rounded up, it's about a 90% mortality. So I had a remnant of colonies alive. And the bees that came through the winter last year were beautiful. It's like they came through unscathed. It's like, what happened,
Where is everybody?
It just was, it's like, okay, you guys are the ones that made it, and you're making, and they're just boiling over with bees. I just wish I had a little bit more, to where I didn't have to rely on, bringing in bees from California to really get my numbers up and going. It was the first time since I think 2008. I think since 2008 that I had to buy bees. So, it was a humbling experience. But the point is that it was so much work. If I was in my later, let's say I was like close to retiring, and this happened to me, it would have probably been one of those moments that I would have just said, yeah, I think I'm just going to sell everything off and
I'm done.
be done with it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I learned so much, and I guess you have to find a silver lining. For me, especially being, that I was treatment free and I say this, I still and that's the thing, I want to be transparent with everybody, because everyone now, every people recognize me as a treatment free beekeeper, but it's like last year I used formic acid, Formic Pro, on my production colonies that still had the packaged queens in them.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, what's that?
I think that, I mean, if you brought in any kind of unselected stock, I think that if you're wanting to have something to show for it, that you probably need to. And that's a blanket statement, because I brought in some that was killer, but I brought in stuff that was productive, but it just didn't have a mite defense. Their defensive game was weak.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the point I always tell people too, when you're doing this on a business kind of scale, like, it's for me personally, I'm not always going to settle with the bottom line, but at the end of the day, I have to answer to the bottom line.
Oh yeah.
I need to be able to say, I need bees to do this. And if I don't have bees, then I can't do this. So, and that's the thing, I took a huge, I am in up until last year where I lost, where I had such a huge loss, catastrophic loss, my apiary has done significantly well. I had good crops of honey, got top dollar for the honey. So I had a big pile of cash that we sat on liquid. So, but the funny thing was, I remember telling my wife, what are we going to do with this money? We can invest it, we can put it somewhere. Otherwise, we're just going to get, we got to move it around so we don't get taxed on it as much or whatever. But I went, that after having our first meeting, I went out and looked at the bees later in February and March, and it just was horrible. It's like everything's gone. So it's like, well, we're going to take $30,000 and just go buy bees. So I'd never spent that much money on bees before. So to take my flatbed pickup, and I had to retrofit it, so I could close it off and fit package bees in, and I was thinking, I got some insurance. I was thinking, do I really even need the insurance? Driving from driving from Pennsylvania back up to here, it's like, well, if the truck tips over or something happens and all these bees die, it's like I'm out 30 grand, so it's if I had to get some shoddy insurance, that'll cover the trip just in case anything happens.
Probably a good idea.
Anyways, it was just an experience, and I can tell you right now, beekeeping is so much more fun when you have your own bees alive and you don't have to go buy packages. I've been so spoiled adopting a paradigm by raising queens, producing nucleus colonies, and having such great success with it over the last decade, where it's been so long since I bought packages or any other bees into my apiary. It just is like, wow, I can't believe that a lot of people resort to this year after year after year. They just say, well, just get more packages. Or even, I'm always telling, especially people up my way that are supplying these packages, like, hey guys, why don't you take like 50 of these packages that you're buying up from California or Georgia, buy some queens from me, or buy some queens from somebody else who's raising them, locally and got some good stock, northern stock, replace, take those packages, build them up, and then just deconstruct them all into nucleus colonies. So you can here's what I did. I took 50 packages, and out of 50 packages, we made a little over 300 nucleus colonies. Nice. And obviously all those colonies got queens from the breeders that, survived the winter. So they got, brand new queens from proven stock. And I'm just telling people that are up my way, it's like, why aren't you guys doing this? Like, if you could produce, out of every package, you could increase it by 6 colonies. And that was good timing, and the weather was just right, because everything, I didn't have a swarm, with those. If you had swarming issues, obviously you might get 4 or a return. Maybe you wouldn't even get, 2 nukes out of a package, because they'd all swarm off. You have no brood or honey, or you wouldn't have any brood to make up nukes. But regardless, it's just baffling. And I'm always drilling these guys up here that are selling these bees. It's like, hey guys, you've got to start raising your own. At least try. But and it's like, you don't, and that way you don't even have to drive to Florida. You don't have to drive to Georgia. You don't have to drive, wherever you're going to pick up California bee, packages or whatever. But anyways, it was amazing that to say, like, hey, how many nukes can we make up, out of setting aside 50 package bees and just let them build up into the equipment. By the middle of June, we have the queens ready. So we just deconstructed everything. And I think this is, I had my helper and I, in one day, we could go through, actually, it was a half a day. I grafted in the morning, did some queen ring work in the first part of the day. The second half of the day, we went out and made up nukes. I think we made 130 nukes in half a day.
Dang, nice.
I mean, it's just like this system that you have, at least the system I use is just, it's so, I've been doing it for the last decade. So it's like, for me to do this, it's just like clockwork. But anyways, I'm just amazed that more people are doing it because it's so fun and it's so easy. I shouldn't say easy, there's work, but it's so much more easier than just buying packages every year. That's my point. So
I think part of the problem, which I love that you took the packages and then let them build, because you can get packages so early. You know what I mean? But
I picked mine up. I picked them up on the 23rd of April. 22nd, drove down 22nd, came up on the 23rd. By the 24th, everything was, and I bought 200 of them, so 200 packages. Was it 200? Yeah, it was like, no, 180 packages, 50 of them set aside for making, nukes. And then the rest I used to put in, just to put in some colonies so I could see if I could make a crop of honey. So anyways, and then obviously the process now is to getting, I was able to get most of them requeened, but now this spring, whatever's alive from those packages will get requeened with queens from my stock here this spring. But anyways, you were talking, Cory.
Well, I tell people the same thing as far as raising your own queens and, that just getting into that groove. But I think part of it is like what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe realistic at times, unrealistic timelines, like people think like you pick up package bees with new mated queens on April, whatever, like 23rd or even early April at times, like there's no way you can produce that here. You know what I mean? Unless it's like an overwintered nuke or something, but that's going to be your power colonies. I don't like selling those off. Plus if new beekeepers buy them, you know what I mean? Like they're swarmy anyway. They want to swarm on them, and they'll make great cell builders. And really, you can really see them take off and harness that. But I feel like if people had a little bit more, or they're going to have to get accustomed to more of a reasonable timeline. People think if you can't get a nuke, but like if you can't get it in April, then it's not going to make it through winter. The following year.
Perfect point is 3 pounds of bees, which is amazing. You shake 3 pounds of bees into a 10 frame deep. It's like there's a lot of room, right? There's not a lot of bees in there. So it's like there's a lot of wiggle room, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So shaking 3 pounds of bees and on 10 combs with some honey. I mean, obviously I'm shaking them on the foundation with honey. They don't have to do anything besides start laying and start getting to work. But 3 pounds of bees on April 23rd, and by I think like the 5th of June, they're in 3 deeps. And we were at that point, I was tipping up the top deep, and obviously the top deep has got a sprinkling of brood, and they're starting to put some honey. So it's not like they're wall to wall, brood or whatever in 3 deeps, but 2 deeps, where it's all obviously the brood is. The 3rd deep was just kind of, keeping the brood nest open and keeping them from swarming. But by the time we started to make nukes, they're just starting to form some cells. So it's like perfect timing, for them to be at like the point where they're, have a big population enough to start to really get that swarming, impulse built up. And we just went through and just, started deconstructing them and turning them all into nukes at that point. So, and that was done over the course of, obviously, because I didn't have enough queens to do it all in one fell swoop. So we did it over, I think, the course of 3 weeks. Every 8 days, because I'm on an 8-day cycle for queen ring. So every 8 days I had queens or queen cells. And over the course of 3 rounds of that, we had them all, deconstructed and then turned into nukes by then. Awesome.
That's good stuff.
But anyway, I mean, that's the fun part of it, is just to see, some years you probably, I mean, if I was to repeat that again this year, the quality of the packages might be less and the queens might be more, might be garbage. So therefore they don't build up as much and I don't get as much as a return on how many nukes you can make up out of 50 packages. But that was my biggest fear too, is with the packages. I was so afraid of getting Georgia packages up, at least, on the East Coast here where I am. But there's just, you spend, what is it, almost $200 for a package, and then you have,
Yeah.
a queen that supersedes, or is a drone layer, or, just garbage queens.
Yeah.
So it's like I went the California route because obviously there's less, no hive beetle issues, and supposedly the queens were good, but I timed it right because I guess, I think out of the packages, I think I had like 5 or under a dozen queen issues out of 180.
That's not
So
bad.
no, I was thinking, I was losing sleep thinking I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have 30% of the queens are gonna be junk, and I'm gonna have to run around and combine packages, combine
Yeah.
everything to keep it viable. But it was, it went off without a hitch, and it went pretty well. So
What are you thinking going forward?
going forward, and I've been trying to reconcile like what's going on. And I don't know if this resonates with a lot of beekeepers, because I don't know, I'm not in everybody's head. I'm not really plugged into like the chat, like, the chatter on Facebook or anything, because I'm off Facebook now. But I there, from my little window on what I'm doing and talking with a few commercial guys up my way and other beekeepers my way, something has shifted. In at least in New England, in this part, Vermont, New Hampshire, there's whether we were the last like stronghold to get like this realm of, this run of new variants with deformed wing virus or PMS stuff. But it seems like there's the bees don't have, they kind of lost this vigor like they used to have. My point being is, like, obviously my point being is that losing 90% of my apiary in 2020 going into 2021, it was a result of, we had really dry conditions. We had drought, plus, I'm not treating the bees there too, so I'm exposed to a whole bunch of stuff as if I was, compared to if I was not, or if I was treating. And but my point being is that the viral loads, there's something going on behind the mites, because I've been doing this long enough to see how mites play out in a large population of managed in my bee yards. And usually it's always the crashes have always been isolated to yards, but this was like, everything was not, nothing was unscathed. Everything was affected, except for the remnant of colonies that came out of this, and they were beautiful. But so my point being is that there's something that shifted in like the ecology, or what's going on in beehives, in a sense, like the virus, whether it's different, the viruses are more, what's the word I'm looking for? Virulent. There's just, you got it. Yeah. They just crash much harder. It's almost like there's, I don't know how to describe it. I wouldn't say it's quite like when we first started to see mites and the bees are just completely helpless, but there's definitely, like, right now it feels like the mites have the upper hand.
Yeah.
In the realm of, this kind of dance between bees and mites. The mites are kind of on top right now, and it's like, okay, when is that gonna shift? And you're gonna start to see, maybe, and that's the thing, we don't know anything with any certainty, but it's like, all right, will this shift, and then the bees will have an upper hand, or will there be a little bit more of an equilibrium? Because, over the course of my time without using treatments, like, I've always done very well, and I've always had really good looking bees going into winter and out of winter. And there was always a percentage that would die off, but it was never like what I had experienced.
Yeah, I think you're right too. Some things, it seemed like we were seeing a downturn, like our losses went up locally. Like I heard a lot more people talking about like late season absconds and like weird stuff, like. Which of course results in colony death. They're not going to make it swarming in October, November, or whenever they actually do, weird stuff like that. But the past year or so, it seems like my survival rate's gone up a little bit. I don't know if it's because I started tightening up our VSH scores, to where it's, like if you're shooting a group with a gun, you'll have them scattered. Well, my group keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And like with the breeders, it's like sub MOA, it was really tight. But I still lose bees. It seems like the ones I lost were like 5-frame nukes, double 5-framers, but a lot of them didn't. I say a lot of them. The last round I made didn't get up into that second box. Maybe I
Yep.
didn't
Is
feed
it-
them enough. I lost.
Do you typically have good success with the last round of nukes that you make up, like at the tail end of your season, where it's almost like a Hail Mary of like, hey, these things, I'm just going to make up some nukes, and they're almost like insurance nukes. If they make it, great. If they don't, well, you tried, kind of thing. Do you have good luck with getting those last rounds of nukes into the next season?
It totally depends on the weather. Like
Okay,
it can
so
be
you're
really easy, and I've done them late, like August even. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And then
yeah.
luck out and have a decent flow, and then feed them a bit too, and have several get through. But it seems like the smaller ones are always a bit more vulnerable. They just don't have as much
Mhm.
drawn comb to pack with stores, and they just. But on the other side, if they make it through, they explode. Like you better get them in some bigger equipment quick, and then they're going to be a cell builder because they're eventually going to want to swarm anyway. But yeah, it seems
Yep.
like the earlier ones, the earlier I make them, the more effortless it is, But it depends on the yard too, because where I dropped these, I don't think there was a good fall flow there at all. So I think just whatever I fed them and maybe a little bit more is about all they got. And I still had, I mean, I maybe lost 30 or 40% out of that 1 yard of the
Yep.
doubles, of the smaller ones. I don't think I lost any of the bigger colonies, but there wasn't a whole lot there. It was less than a dozen larger colonies. But anyway, here at this yard, which it seemed like there was a good flow, throughout the year, I didn't lose a lot out of here. There was a couple that crapped out, but overall, it seemed like it was pretty good. So, and I don't know if that's because my VSH score, there's so many things, like, or if it was just nutrition, such a massive part of it. Like,
Yeah.
that whenever you said you had a heavy loss, like conditions weren't ideal. So,
Yeah. No.
it's
Correct.
like it's just an added stress, like if you're not eating, if you're starting to starve, man, your body, the immunity goes to trash. I'm sure the bees are the same way.
Yep.
So, you get the 1-2
Oh yeah.
punch.
You got it. Yeah. Any in my short stint of doing this, any year where there's, and obviously you listen to anyone who's been doing it for the length of time as well. It's like any year where there's nutritional stress. If you can't get the pathogens, if you can't keep the mite, if you have mite troubles and you have stress nutritionally on top of that, you're asking for a big problems, big
Yep.
issues. And that's the thing. Like I'm going to be, if I guess to answer your question, what am I going to do different? What am I doing different? Like I'm really interested in pursuing VSH, selecting VSH, it's not in the realm of, AI like you're doing, kind of incorporating it into isolated open matings and seeing the success of what that looks like over the next, few years going forward, especially if I was to look at like a 5, maybe even another 10 years out, what will things look like? But if I was to be reasonable, say in 5 years, if we start doing, some real hardcore selecting and using some VSH assays on breeders and on drone mothers, and really working hard on making sure that those VSH genetics are in and around the mating yards, and that those genetics are verified from the breeders. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Like I've always in the past, I've always just kind of felt like, by the paradigm of selecting from bees that survive in a treatment-free apiary, selecting, and that's the thing. I guess I want to work. I hate this thing of like treatment-free. I'm trying to get away from the lingo of treatment. It's like by just being a beekeeper that's convicted of my convictions for this are just to raise good queens, right?
I love it.
So by this pursuit, because it's a process, we're never going to be done, right? It's always this process that we're engaged in. So my process is like, I feel convicted that the best way to breed for Varroa resistance is to not use crutches, to keep the bees. Obviously, you don't want to lose everything like I did last year all the time, because you'd be out of business. But regardless, so the best way to do this is to withhold the treatments, and you would probably agree with me on that.
So,
Um,
well, not just me,
right
not just me. If you talk to, because I think a lot of people, some people, may think you're doing cool stuff, but if they hear you're not treating your bees, they'll look at you, like you're irresponsible or something's going on. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I also feel like it's scientifically supported. Like if you I just talked with Garrett Dodds, a tech down at the USDA ARSB lab recently, and he said, like they don't use treatments on the USDA colonies that they have. And Jeff Harris and
Yeah,
others have stated the same thing, because if you do that, you can't see if they actually have resistance or not, you know?
correct. Yeah.
Right.
And
It just
I'll tell you what,
clouds your
like,
vision.
exactly. And I don't know about you, but I don't have, I've made an attempt, my hat's off to guys like Randy Oliver, they're doing all this fabulous work. I'm not trying to criticize them, right? But I tried, the whole notion of going out and sampling all my colonies.
Oh my
Not,
God.
can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah.
IPM, this whole notion with IPM, especially on a commercial level, it's like there's no way you can go through the whole apiary, like, having 300 colonies that produce honey, and
Right.
then another 400 nucleus colonies, and another 300 or 400 mating nukes. Like, that's a small operation, but for me and another 2 other people that work with me in the summer, like, I don't have the bandwidth to go through all those
Yeah.
colonies at a time where it needs to be done to sample for mites and to find the mite resistant
Right.
queens.
I
So
don't,
yeah, the easiest way to do this, the easiest way to do it is just to withhold the treatments, and by gradually, and obviously by propagating your sort of your genetics that are proven. And the nucleus colony thing is really what's
Yeah.
crucial, and that's nothing new anymore. But that's what's going to stave off the overall, like, the onslaught of mortality you're going to get in the really heavy, strong production colonies that have mites, that the mite populations are kind of undisturbed. The nucleus colonies always fared better. So that's what's keeping this whole thing afloat. But here's my point. The thing that in the 10 years I've been doing this, the true resistant traits always seems to be isolated to a small percentage of colonies.
Yeah.
So my whole thing is like, what is going on? What is this mechanism that I'm overlooking by just selecting from those that survive? And obviously they have to survive two seasons. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So there has to be something else that has to be considered to be able to expand those resistant traits to a larger population of colonies in a given apiary. So I was thinking, like, is it VSH? You kind of, what your work has kind of spurred me on to give this a try. In the early days of buying, VSH breeders from Glenn, Tom and Suki Glenn. Like, I was thinking back, the breeders that I used to get in, from Tom, or I think right when Tom handed everything over to, what's his name? VP. Who runs, I forget his name, who runs VP.
Oh,
Queens.
Adam.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he kind of got some of that. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he got some of that germplasm or whatever, some of the breeding stock from Tom and Suki Glenn. But so getting a few breeders from them over, I think I got Tom, and it was like over a decade ago. But my point being is that those VSH genetics were like, they were just wonderful. They're untouchable. But they obviously, like anything, they just kind of got watered down over 5 years, and they did. But if you can somehow maintain that and nurture that, and kind of harness and reinvigorate those VSH genetics, I guess I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to really push hard to select for, using Harbo's, like what you had mentioned, John Harbo's essay for VSH selection. It seems like it's very practical. In the field, you can go and find your breeders, and take frames of brood that are at the right stage, and just go through and find out where they stand.
Yep. And that's the thing, like you were saying, it's not practical to test all your colonies. Like, I think Zach Lamas has told people that I SMR test all my colonies. I'm like, that's not exactly true. I only SMR test what I want to keep.
Yeah.
Whatever passes the test, I like it. They don't rip my head off. I can work them without gloves. They're productive. You know what I mean? And then I just test those. But I mean, it takes about 20 minutes a colony. You can get it down below that, once you do several. But it's not as bad as what people think it is. But I've heard other people, even researchers, mention like uncapping thousands of cells or something. Like, I mean, I don't know it could be a thing. I don't know what assay they're using, but like, I think you can get really accurate results off of a Harbo, and that's just 100 cells. And if you don't find what you need, you may have to double it to 200.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if you treated it, you can get a false positive.
True.
So that's the
Yep.
catch-22 as well. So it like behooves you to leave it be, or maybe test right before you're gonna
Yeah. Well,
hit them with
that
something.
my whole thing with treatment is like going forward, it's like I'm not against using it, using a treatment when I need to, but I'm not going, my first impression is I'm not gonna go running right out, looking to put Formic Pro on the first thing in the
Yeah.
spring. Now,
Yeah.
here's my thing. I only treated once last year. Obviously, I'm starting with packages, but my whole thing was like, last year being that the packages I treated, I only used one treatment, and that was in August.
And it was an organic acid too. So I mean, it's
Exactly.
not like
Well, I
got
have a whole, I
residue.
mean, I can speak a great length about my frustrations with Formic Pro. I don't think anyways, but that's a whole nother conversation. But, if I am going to use a treatment, like my whole thing is I don't want to use more than one treatment. I don't,
Yeah.
I'm not going to just go completely off the deep end. That's not the right word. I'm just not going to just go right into saying, hey, whatever it takes to keep these bees alive now. And I'm going to, treat them in the spring. And at least in this part of New England, most commercial guys, that are non-migratory usually treat twice a year, in the spring and then once, in the fall or early, late summer when they take the crop off, honey crop, they'll treat then. So,
Same here.
most, if I needed to treat, I think using one treatment would be kind of like the limit, because I don't want to, kind of, I'm not looking to get into the whole treatment, treadmill and constantly be chasing mites, and I think that's the thing too. It's like, I want to breed queens that are resistant. So I want to be able to be spurred on by, I guess, from the beginning, I never really I never, up until a few years ago, I never really even counted mites. It was like, this is this whole, it's all, I feel like a first grader sometimes, it's like, oh, okay, how do you do an alcohol wash? What's the right, what's the right number for mites?
Right, exactly.
What are the treatments available nowadays? But I guess I'm looking to, I want to be able to keep bees like I did when I first started out, building this apiary up. And that's the thing, like I built this whole thing from treatment-free bees, you know what I mean? So it's like, I haven't given up on the notion that this isn't, that you can't do this. But at the same time, I can't take another hit like I did last year either, at least like in the immediate future. I need
At least for a few years at least, to where you can
Exactly.
steam again.
Exactly. It's like I'd like to be able to do this, so I need to be reasonable. And I guess like one of my point is, I'm just going to let the bees kind of show me like, hey, if in some point in the summer there's a lot of stuff that's starting to look a little shaky and there's a lot of stress from mites, it's like I got to intervene, I guess. But here's the thing, I got 10 years of experience behind me of knowing knowing how things look. I guess it's not like it's my first rodeo, you know what I mean?
Well, you knew before, because you even told me when we talked, you're like, things are not looking good. You know what I mean? Like if I remember correctly, you're like,
no, yeah, you're right.
These they don't look great, like I'm anticipating it might be a bad winter,
Yeah. No, and that's just it. I guess that's my, you hit the nail on the head. It's like you can just smell it coming sometimes. And I think the longer you keep bees, the more like you have your hands in a beehive, the more intuitive you are about what's kind of going on. And if I kind of get that sixth sense, like, hey, this is going to be another whopper, then I'm just going to have to get in there and take care of it. But like I said, last year was the anomaly. It was the first time I've experienced something that bad. And if that happens again, so be it. But
well, it's beekeeping, but that's basic IPM. What IPM is not just blanket treating everything. It's trying to figure out, is there an actual need for it before I use it? That's the definition of IPM, basically. Don't treat unless you need to. But
I think IPM's, it's such a funny thing, right? Because most people that use IPM for Varroa management, it's like, well, if you shake, you do an alcohol wash on a half a cup of bees and you got 2 mites, well, time to treat them.
I've heard one
because let's be honest. Well, exactly, right? So it's
universities, they're like, what? They're like, yeah, if you find one, you're already in jeopardy. I'm like, what's the point of sampling it then? Because I mean, there's most of them are one, but they also
how many beekeepers? Yeah, how many beekeepers have good mite resistant stock where the bees on their own can maintain those levels. Far and few. Far and few.
Exactly. Yeah, not a lot. I think you had
But here,
two things you mentioned that are key. I think if you brought in some more VSH genes that are high concentration and then test them periodically, or at least test the ones you're wanting to graft out of, I think that's the key, because you said it before, like whenever you got Tom's bees, they were rock solid, which I saw the same thing. Man, they were just beasts, and they just ate mites for lunch. But if you don't keep that selection pressure on it, you know what I mean? It kind of muddies after a little bit. So, but if you like tested, and just grafted out of the ones, even if they're open mated, that are higher scoring, you'll retain that. And then if you see something starting to look like shit, and it's not even late in the season, requeen it or re-nuke it. If you've got some smaller nukes, with some really good queens in it, as soon as you start seeing a problem, requeen that colony, and you still may have to intervene. But I think that if you did that, you would possibly be surprised at what kind of results you'll see. And they have like a super strong viral resistance mechanism. Like whenever I was using Tom's ESHBs, I would see one ate up with parasitic mite syndrome. And I just did a switcheroo with the queen. I didn't treat him or anything. And then within a month and a half or so, it was completely gone. There was not even a single bee with deformed wing in there. And it was just because they're, VSH, they were throwing them out.
Yeah, no, and
that's a viral load pupa.
Yeah, no, I think every beekeeper likes to boast in their own bees, but it's like I feel like, again, having over a decade of experience with building up an apiary without treatments, it's like I know for a fact what I had, and even what I had before the crash of last year, and even coming with the remnant that I have now. It's like these things are there's they're solid, man.
Yeah.
Like they can take it on the chin. Like they clearly have, and they it's like you said, if I was to just throw some just whatever, just generic queens from any beekeeper, big queen producer in the United States, these things would have crashed, months, a long time ago.
Yeah.
They would be done, they'd be out of here. But because I've seen the same thing.
They got the environmental one too, and that's the thing too. That's what keeps me, because I think that's a realistic expectation. Like you said, I think a lot of people aren't open with their losses, like, because it makes them feel like are a failure or whatever, when that's totally not the case at all. It's the environment that we're in now,
It's funny. Speaking of that, like, everyone being afraid of losses. So I don't know, because again, being that I'm not kind of connected on the internet like I used to, kind of word got out, obviously, that, Troy lost a lot of his bees, and I noticed my phone wasn't ringing as much.
Really?
And my orders for queens didn't like completely dry up, but nobody was calling looking for queens.
And interesting.
It was interesting. Yeah, it was just interesting. Like everybody thought I had the plague or something, and stopped call. And it seems like when I chime in on like some of the state beekeeping meetings or like local bee club meetings, around here, it's like, hey, you're back. We thought you would sell everything off and move to Aruba or something.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, guys, I've been here all along. And that's the thing. Like last year, in sight of losing building everything back up, I was able to I think we raised around 800 queens altogether.
What? Are you serious?
Yeah. Serious, man. That's the thing. Like, people have no, I'm not trying to boast, but people have no clue. You know what I mean? They just have no clue about what a good beekeeper can do. And it's like, I always tell people, like, just, if you come over for like a day and I'll show you what I'm doing. And it's like, and I'm not I'm not the only one. There's plenty other hardworking, beekeepers out there that can do exactly what I'm doing, if not more. But, again, like I last year it just blew my hair back to see like what like me and two other people that helpers that I had last year, what we could do and how far we could take, resurrect this thing that had
Yeah.
collapsed and bring it back to its former glory in a sense.
I knew
But
you
we
would.
pretty much that. Yeah, well, I guess that's one of the biggest lessons I learned last year. Is like, okay, I can do it.
Yeah.
I can
Yep.
go. I can, if that ever was to happen again, I kind of got a rough idea what I need to do and how I can make it a little bit easier. But yeah, no, I'm just amazed. Again, most people have no clue about
Mhm.
how to make that work. But again, and not everybody. It's not like everybody needs to know. But I always feel like there's a lot of know-it-all beekeepers out there that really have no idea. They have no clue.
I would agree with that. And it's queen rearing that, like, if you can't rear your own queens, you're not nearly in as good a spot. Because I did a bunch of late season splits years ago and like split a bunch of stuff up, and I lost at least 60%, if not a little bit more than 60%. And I was like devastated, because you just open it up dead colony after dead colony, just like a repeated kicks in the nuts, and then but then I look
Yeah.
back on it, like I didn't even, and if you had money to buy bees, that's like a steroid shot. That's resources, I just kind of limped. Well, well, like you said, whatever didn't die, I had a bunch that were just looked like $1,000,000, and I
Yeah.
just split and split and split. And I even had some surplus. I didn't sell a ton of nukes, but I did sell some. But then at the end of the season, you look back, you're like, holy crap, all these dead colonies are buzzing around again. It just,
Yeah, isn't that something? Like I remember even in the early years of me, with whole, stuff, without treating the early years of my apiary without using treatments, having a 40% winter mortality in the beginning was a huge
yeah,
it was a big hurdle to get over. I was used to having 15, 10, 20% mortality. And then when I was deciding to say, hey, I want to raise really good queens, so I'm going to stop treating, I'm going to really kind of push this apiary towards queen breeding, not just propagation of queens but breeding of queens.
yeah,
So by withholding the treatments, starting to see 40%, and even obviously there's been a few years where there's 50, 60%.
yeah.
I was devastated by the amount of empty equipment in my building. But like you said, the beautiful thing was by the middle of June, early July, I'm reaching for the last super.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
everything's filled back up with bees again. So,
it's a beautiful thing.
but I mean, if you think about it, that's the way that mechanism of how bees rapidly build up and expand, in population, is the mechanism that's saving this industry, right?
Absolutely.
Like, whether you're a commercial guy, running all over the country and you're getting 20, 30%, or what's the BIP average right now? 35% mortality or something.
It's up, it's more than that. Or I thought it was 40 some odd percent.
Yeah, it's funny.
A lot of people that are, using 2 or 3 treatments a year too are in that figure as well. So
yeah, and here's the thing, like I was getting 35, 40% mortality with no treatments for, again, like most of that decade that I was running my apiary without treatments. So it's like, it's like, how do you explain that, right?
Yep.
So anyways, but it's that same mechanism that's saving everybody's butt, is their ability to utilize the honeybee's ability to rapidly fill a void, and just like it's that insect, it's like that distinct trait of an insect, if there's a void, to be able to rapidly fill a void if there's food and the conditions are right with the weather, they just you go from feast to famine. But anyways, it's so fun to kind of ride that wave, in the summer months, of saying, hey, look at this potential here and all these resources. Let's make good use of them in the time they're available to us, and let's try to make this work.
Absolutely. Man, that's the thing too. I hope you raised what you said you did, raise tons of queens out of those remaining colonies.
Oh yeah, I got right to my primary agenda last year was to just raise as many daughters from all the, from not all the survivors, because some of them didn't meet my standards, but there was, six breeders in particular. We stretched a penny, man. We made it. I tried to raise as many queens from those girls as I could, just to get those genetics dispersed out into the apiary again.
Because they had the ultimate selection pressure catastrophic event.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? More than the thing, average.
Like, more than the average. And that's the thing I wanted to mention too. On those breeders, I did not treat them at all last year. And
cool.
you know, at the end of the season in August, you know, I was getting you know, I was shaking like 2, 3, and on 2 of them there was no, you know, I couldn't find a mite. No
What?
mites.
That's freaking awesome.
Exactly, man. I was like, whoa, I don't know what's going on. But again, like it's
Yeah.
like I'm just gonna keep an eye on these girls and see what happens. And it's like, and that's like, again, I've always seen that in the past. Like I've always been, you know, I've always witnessed colonies that are doing these miraculous things against Varroa mites. But it's like, how do you, now I'm kind of moving on to the next thing. It's like, how do I take this? What's the missing mechanism
Yeah.
of making that genetic trait multiply out into a bigger population into the apiary than what I've been experiencing in the past?
And I think it's like there's multiple traits, you know what I mean? Like I'm hung up on VSH,
Exactly.
but it doesn't mean that VSH is the only set of traits. It just,
Yeah.
it's a damn good one, I think, but it's not
No,
like
I'm
it's
right there
the
with you, Cory.
only. There's others, so
Correct.
it'd be cool if you could figure out what it is exactly. I mean, maybe
Yep.
it may be straight up VSH. You know, if you assay them, you could easily tell, or it may be
Yeah, exactly.
something else. But it would be cool if you could figure out what it was, and then utilize some kind of selection to keep that pressure to where you keep, you know what I mean, where whatever it is that they've got, you can keep concentrating it and keep that natural selection on it. Not just natural
Yeah.
selection, but beekeeper selection.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, then that's the, I mean, if I think, you know, that's probably the, if I had to have gone through losing most of my apiary to get, you know, to really find these, you know, few families that are left, genetic families that I have left that are really going to be the thing that push this whole thing into the future, then so be it. But anyways, yeah, I'm right there with you. I by, you know, befriending you and talking with you and seeing your success with VSH and having exposure to good VSH stock in the past, I just feel convicted that it's a path. Like right now for next season, I'm gonna tackle, you know, by selecting hard for VSH, see what
Awesome.
that gets, you know, kind of keep that on the burner for the next few years going forward by, you know, really selecting
Yeah.
for VSH. And then in the future, you know, if I can find, I think by just being, you know, just being a good beekeeper and observing and finding, you know, what's really going on and what's so special about these bees' ability to really, you know, keep mites in check. Finding out, you know, what, yeah, because there's, like you said, it's multifaceted. It's not
yeah.
a single
Yep.
genetic trait. There's
And
so
that's
many things going on.
And that's the thing too, like, is like you and me both mentioned, like, oh man, Tom had really good bees. And I know that he did. And like I miss the heck out of him. But at the same time, like it was like one dude in the US, you know what I mean? Like, that's a
Yeah, right?
genetic
Yeah.
bottleneck if I've ever seen one. And I mean, he had a bunch of diversity in his stock. It wasn't like it was a bunch of single drone mated stuff that he was selling off, you know, like it had some diversity in there.
Yeah.
I think it's important, like people like you start selecting for whatever does good in your area with your management with that testing on top of it. And then I can do that in Southeast Missouri, and somebody can do it in Washington, and somebody in the Dakotas.
Yeah.
And then you've got, because it's an additive trait, you know what I mean? It's not like
Yep.
a breed of bee or anything. So you can have, you know, area specific VSH lines if all the breeders, like I've said before, if we beat Varroa, I think it'll be like a small army of queen breeders, not just one or two heroes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because then
Yep.
you've got diversity and you can make crosses between different stuff, and you know what I mean? You've got more to work with.
Yeah. No, and you know, he listen, you know, again, John Keefe kind of saying, you know, it's like I'm not willing to settle for short-term solutions, you know,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
kind of my biggest, you know, ever since, you know, I started raising queens and really kind of being convicted to say, hey, I want to do a good job at this, and let, you know, just taking one step at a time, and one, you know, one kind of the path of logic being therein, like good queens means you need to let kind of bees do what bees do naturally. You need constant selection pressure from whatever hosts or pathogens and pests.
Yep.
You know, you want to find resistance. You need that pressure on them all the time. You know, you need, and you know, you obviously without killing everything off, but you
Oh,
need
yeah.
constant selection pressure. But like you're right, I from the longest time, I've always scratched my head and be like, why aren't more people doing this? Like, I'm not talking about everybody needs to be doing this, but I know enough beekeepers out there with the resources of their colonies, the number of colonies they keep, the know-how, It's like, why aren't they doing this? And it just suddenly dawned on me the other day, like last year it dawned on me. It's like, because it's a lot of damn work. It's a lot of
A
work. And
lot.
maybe, you know, and maybe people just don't have the desire to do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or they, you know, but that's kind of what I've come to conclude, is just like, this isn't for everybody. And that's okay. Like, I completely respect that. And sometimes I got to remember that, because I get all excited and, you know, kind of like, well, you know, can't you, you know, come look at what I'm doing. You know, this is profound. It's, you know, not a lot of people are doing it. And I got to remember that, oh no, that's just me. You know, not a lot of people are going to get excited about the things I'm getting excited about, or, you know, willing to take the risk and the step forward and take it on the chin, you know, to like you said, push this thing into the future.
I think there's more people that are willing to, though. I could be wrong. I think there's people that want to, but they want to see somebody else do it first. You know, if like you run out and get killed by a bus, you know, they're like, nope, not gonna do that. But you know, if you can overcome adversity, or if you get knocked down, you get back up and take off again, and then collectively more people are doing it, you know what I mean? Then I feel like, and say, here's how you do it. Here's a few tips. If you select for this, it gives them a massive advantage. Or if you select for this, you know what I mean? And then like queen rearing, queen rearing, queen rearing. Like if you mix that together, you've got a winning combination there. And it is the long-term solution.
And I guess the example that I'm trying to, you know, I want to make known to people is like, I'm not just breeding queens too. It's like most of my income's coming from honey production. So a lot of my apiary is built off like a commercial, you know, a commercial kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of my income is coming from the same kind of cash, the same revenue sources that, you know, apiaries that are migrant, you know, I'm not pollinating, but you know, honey production, nukes and queens, but honey production, honey sales make up probably, you know, 70, some years 75% of my income. So, you know, a lot of what I'm doing is I need to secure a crop of honey, you know, if I can 25,000 pounds of honey, you know, in my operation. It's like, this isn't just some rinky dink, you know, that's what we're looking, that's actually what's playing on, you know, with this whole breeding program. It's not like I'm exclusively just taking all my time and energy to raise good queens with a strict breeding program. I'm also managing, you know, a large population of colonies for honey production on top of that, you know, to make a living at it. So
and genetics that are actually commercially valuable. You know, because I think sometimes you get in danger of having like, you know, like if it's just natural selection, you know, you might end up with like the Sealy bees, you know, to where like they don't die, but they're not really going to leave a deep unless they swarm, and they're probably not going to fill your supers up. You know, they're alive, but I mean, you're actually pushing them to where they're alive and they have resistance, but are also commercially viable. And if we don't have that, you won't get industry buy-in, you know, if they're not productive. But I think you can have your cake and eat it too, really.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be able to, at the end of the day, to do this and unless you're, you know, you have a trust fund or you got a big lump of cash somewhere that you can just live off of. But if you're going to do bees, if it's going to make up a good portion of your time and your day, you need to be able to justify your time and make it, you know, pay for itself. So, I mean, that's then the most beautiful thing about this whole thing is like, to the scope and scale that I've been doing it, is that, you know, I can raise my family. And I can even, you know, go through the whole thing, like, again, going back to like almost losing everything, building it back up. You know, I think every farmer worth their salt probably has had a story like where either the flood came through and wiped out the lower, you know, anyways, like where there's always kind of like this rebirth of like almost coming to the edge of losing everything, the brink, you know, in a sense. But you know, that's I guess what I want to portray to people is like, this is, you know, I don't want to run from I don't want to run or sugarcoat the idea, you know, sugarcoat the reality that, you know, I lost most of my bees last year, but that, you know, you can build them back up. You can have a legitimate breeding program built upon a remnant population that has gone through, you know, in my case, a decade of, you know, of management without treatments for mites. And at the same time, like as a beekeeper, like you had mentioned, like I'm not going to be stupid about it either. Like I need to be adaptable. If, you know, again, if I see a big, you know, storm coming on the horizon where it's looking like, you know, I could lose them all again. Well, this time I'm not just going to stand by. It's like I need to
Yeah.
intervene and keep them going again.
Absolutely.
But, you know, at the same time, I'm not going to just be out there prophylactically dropping, you know, Amatraz, you know, in every single colony, or Formic Pro in every single colony, you know, spring and fall, whatever the management program is for most people. But anyways, it's just a different voice. It's a different way of doing things that I think a lot of people kind of, it's just so foreign to them. It's almost like they kind of just glaze over, and it doesn't really connect. It doesn't make sense to them, because all they can think of is like, well, I'm so used to, I can't justify anything more than 20% or 15% winter mortality. And it's like, if you can't, and what do I'm a small, you know, beekeeper living in New Hampshire, so I don't know anything, but all I can say is, like, from a beekeeping perspective, if you can't manage your apiary, if you can't take on that, if you can't take on that much loss at any given time, then I think that there's something flawed in that mechanism. Because my whole thing is, like, I don't think, in the grand scheme of things, I question whether or not bees are healthy enough to maintain those rates of mortality, right? If the BIP if the BIP is stating that, you know, 35-40% is the average mortality across the United States, and yet you know, you got a lot of these commercial guys saying, well, I can't afford, if I ever got those that type of loss, you know, we'd go out of business. It's like, well, you probably wouldn't go out of, you know, they probably wouldn't go out of business, but it's just like, yeah, I don't, it's almost like this unhealthy expectation. I guess that's the best thing I can do, the way I can describe it. There's this expectation that's put upon bees to perform at a level that's really not where they're at. Like, we need to get busy at breeding queens, breeding genetics, doing what we need to get creative. We need to really, it's like, what we need to get to work at that, like getting our bees built back up and being healthy again, and trying to do so with as little chemical inputs as possible. That's just my basic conviction. And I think, like, you know, that's what we have to be doing. And call me crazy, call me wrong, but that's kind of where I'm at.
I think you're dead on it. And you said too, like, every farmer worth their salt has seen a bad year or whatever. And that's why, like, I know there's bad year coming because it's farming, you know what I mean? And so, like, that's why I haven't quit my day job yet. But here's the thing too, is like, you're talking about beekeepers that are like, if I had a 30% or 40% loss, I'd have to shut the doors. There's some that may be like that, you know, because maybe they're not managing their money well, or maybe they're not as profitable, or, you know, maybe they need to adjust their prices or their spending or whatever, you know, because you're going to have to be able to take a punch and get back up, you know, especially with not just bees, but any kind of agriculture, cattle, or, you know, beans or whatever. You need to be able to have a bad year, you know, and get back up. But like you said, the killer of even the best farmers would be multiple bad years back to back. But that's usually, it usually doesn't happen. You know what I mean? You'll at least be able to get wind back in your sails. But I'd like to keep growing, and I don't know what I want to do. Like, I know I don't want to stick with a corporate job, you know, till retirement age. I'm not really interested in that unless I had to for some reason, but just mainly getting debt free. So if I have a bad year, I don't hang myself, you know, it's a big part of it. But man.
Well, you'll know, I think it'll be one of those things, you'll know when it's time. You know, I think all the ingredients for you to make that decision will kind of come together, and you'll be able to assess and say, hey, let's take a step out and see what this does, you know?
Yep, I completely agree. And I just want to run bees, you know, like exactly what you're talking about. Just have a small commercial sized, you know, honey production and breeding facility, basically, where I'm selecting for certain traits, and, you know, I'll sell queens, or, you know, breeder queens or whatever. And that's kind of, that's what I'd like to do. And hopefully influence others, you know, that it can be done, and show them how to do it too. You know, like that video I made selecting for VSH, I feel like it pretty much tells you exactly what to do. You know, it's not something that's overly difficult. I thought it had to be something done in a science lab somewhere or something, you know, but not necessarily.
Yep.
Just
Yeah, no,
putting
a
more
lot of this.
pressure on them.
Yep.
Man. Well, you mentioned the Kephas interview too. That dude, he did it on a commercial level and made it work. But the thing too is like after he stopped doing it, I think he passed it off to his son. I don't know if the selection pressure changed or they had a bad year or what, but I think he kind of got out of it or has a lot fewer colonies, doesn't he? But John, ran quite a few for a while, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I know just enough of John's story to kind of get an idea that, yeah, like right now, I think he's probably just got enough to keep himself, and happy with his hands and a few beehives. And
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
whether
so.
if his son's managing, but I mean, that's the whole thing is like if he could do it, and if what he did was, really, and it's not like it's some, make believe story what he did, it's
Right.
actually like he actually did it. And again, some of my like a good friend and mentor of mine, Kirk Webster, it's like I had to go out and visit his apiary to see that this guy wasn't just full of BS. He just
Yeah.
wasn't some keyboard warrior typing away all these great ideas and lofty thoughts about beekeeping with hardly any infrastructure behind him with actual bees to really to stand behind his words. Like, I feel so lucky that I had, people like that right in my backyard that I could just go and see and say, wow, you're actually doing it. And this is the real deal here. It was so inspiring to kind of replicate that in my apiary. So yeah, it is, we have to kind of pick up the flag and kind of run forward with it. Because like you said, if nobody's doing it, then somebody's got to start doing something creative. Like it just feels like in the last, I've been keeping bees since 2004, so it's not a long time, but long enough. But you talk to anybody who's been keeping bees for any length of time, post pre-Varroa, and even like or into the 80s or whatever. Like there's really it's almost like we can't really improve upon anything that's already been created. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like the smoker, the
You're right.
Langstroth hive,
Yeah.
the radial extractor,
Mhm.
a bee veil. If you ever read, what's it, 50 Years Amongst the Bees with what's his name who wrote that? I can't remember. It's on my. It's sitting on my. It's like where he's been telling, hey, the invention of the smoker was like something that was like it put beekeeping, on a trajectory, that could not be. It's like the fact that, I guess my point is the fact that people kept bees at a time where there was no smoker, you had to go and get like a smudge
Yeah.
and wave that around. But this all happened in the late 1800, post Civil War, and right in the turn of the 19th century. Like we cannot improve upon these technologies and these methods like GM Doolittle. We can't seem to like improve upon practices that have been tried and tested, over 150 years ago.
That's true.
Or even almost 200 years ago.
Yeah.
So it just seems like we're
just Sue even said beekeepers don't want to accept new stock and stuff too. Like they want to same as what we've always done,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's funny, like, there's so much. I guess I want to tread lightly, but I have a hard time with like all this, like, probiotics for bees, and it's like, give me a break. If your environment is so bad that the bees can't take care of themselves, like when it comes to like nutrition, because like, let's say, if you are migratory and you're moving bees all over the country, that's one thing. But if you live in an area where the flora and fauna is so bad that you have to like give them probiotics or something. I don't know. Maybe again, I'm completely ignorant of that whole logic, but it just seems really like if nature can't provide at least a majority of the nutrients that bees need, and we have these snake oil salesmen selling all this stuff to beekeepers, because it'll keep your bees alive and it'll keep them healthy. It's like, oh, give me a break. Anyways, I remember buying Honeybee Healthy. I bought like a couple big, big jugs of that one year. It's like, man, this stuff smells great. you know,
Yeah.
put some of that in your syrup. It's like, man, my bees are going to be healthy. They're going to be great. But it's like, man, that's all this is doing is making me feel good. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
it makes me feel like I'm doing something when I'm actually probably doing absolutely nothing. You know, I could just keep the honeybee healthy on the shelf and feed them sucrose syrup and they'll be fine.
Yep.
You know, anyways, but again, I say that with humility. I'm not saying those things are bad, and neither like probiotics, but it's like I've seen so much stuff come up, you know, and it's like I'm not the only one seeing this stuff, but I'm always thinking like, who's buying this stuff? You
Yeah.
know, like what are they thinking? Anyways,
of
and if
hobby
you're
bee-
buying it, Cory, that's fine
Yeah.
too. You know, I'm no shame.
No, I don't use any of that. It's
Yeah.
popular among hobby beekeepers and stuff. You know, they like playing with stuff like that. But I just didn't want, which there's two parts to what I was thinking. I didn't want a bunch of stuff in there like where I got so many variables. Like, what was it? Was it something worked? Was it the honeybee healthy, or was it the thymol I put in there, or was it the strips, or was it, you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah,
the thing is too is I wanted it to not be equipment, so I just used standard. You know, a lot of people would try small cell or top bars or lay-ins or any odd kind of to try to make it work. You know, and I wanted it to be a genetic solution, so I just ran everything like commercial sized, you know, deep brood boxes, medium honey supers, and just, you know, plastic foundation with wood frames and, you know, just
yeah,
standardized stuff. But you were asking like where innovation is going to come or whatever. I think now that we know more about genetics and things, like I think that's where we need to step our game up. It's more people don't need to
I
rely
agree.
on queen producers. They need to do like you said, start producing your own queens, you know, or at least have some people trained locally to crank out high quality queens, you know, and
Yep.
then testing, you know, because mites aren't going anywhere, you know, so just coming out with, okay, well, what traits are beneficial or actually doing something. You know, we know BSH does, you know, ala grooming. Here's how to test for that or whatever. Maybe
Yeah.
that's our innovation, you know, is to actually use something that has resistant characteristics to it. And then you're not so, you know, like IPM's a balance between like the holy grail of any IPM program is host resistant traits.
Mhm.
Like you can't go anywhere without that. Like that's the cornerstone, you know, that the whole house is built on. And nobody, I mean, we just ignore it and go straight for the easy, you know, but if you get that straight, if your foundation's straight, the rest of the house is straight too. You know, I think
Yeah.
we need to go back to that. And what you were saying is pointing in the right direction. It's letting that selection pressure work on them, actually selecting them. You know, like you were saying, you were actually breeding
Yeah.
up, producing queens. You know, put that selection criteria on them, and then raise mass amounts of queens off of them, and you know, rebuild. And I think if more people would start doing that, you know, on a local and on a national level, a lot of problems seem to go away. You know,
Yep.
not
Yeah.
that
No,
we won't
at
have
least
bad years, but
it would be interesting to see the outcome of any of it. You know, it just it would be phenomenal to see more people getting serious and just willing to. And that's the thing too. I want to emphasize, like, we're not in this alone. Like, you know, as beekeepers, you know, we're kind of, we might feel like we're kind of doing it like, hey, I'm doing it all myself, or, you know, look, I'm doing this and everyone's doing something different or whatever. But like, we're all in this together. You know what I mean? Like, if somebody stumbles down and like, you know, so my point is, like, there's going to be people willing to help us along the way. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
if something happened to you, you know, it's like, hey, you know, I'll be whatever I can do to help you back, you know, get back up and going. You know,
Yep.
it's like there's that mentality that's like that we're not. It's not the mentality. The reality is that we're just, if you're you know, a half decent person and you have bees and you're doing a good job with, you know, something good with bees, something bad happens to you, people are gonna help you out. There's a community, you know, that we're built, that we're tied into. Oh, and you mentioned foundations. I last year I got a foundation mill. So I've been making my own.
Are you
Yeah,
serious?
I tell you what, man. I obviously, on the scale I'm doing it, it's ludicrous because it's just so labor intensive, but it's so it's so fun.
I
Like that's the
bet
thing.
so.
Maybe because, some people probably wouldn't enjoy it at all. It's just one more thing that you got to do, one more piece of work. But I find it's so phenomenal. It's amazing to take your own cappings wax and turn it into your own foundation. So it just, I've been, and it's, I've had so much fun this winter. I think we've made, I was trying to keep tally. I think close to 3,000, 2,500 or 3,000 sheets of foundation.
That's awesome. Are you using it in
but
brood
it's,
chambers or like just for cut comb honey, or is it
oh
wired?
my
or
gosh.
what-
Yeah.
what do you-
I started looking at prices and stuff. I was like, holy crap, that's really expensive. Plus shipping. It's like, shit, we're just gonna make everything without, we're just gonna turn. So yeah, we're making, my honey supers are all medium. Yeah, all the, the deeps, so everything got homemade foundation.
That's awesome, man.
So
Very
anyways,
cool.
yeah. I guess that's another thing I want to encourage anybody out there. Obviously, if you've got a huge operation, with tens of thousands of colonies, unless you can hire, Santa's helpers, to
just-
work to work in your sweatshop out back and crank out the foundation old school.
Yeah.
But if you have, like, again, if you're running, if you have around 600 colonies, 500 colonies, that's about what I run usually. I was able to kind of to prove to myself that, I can make enough foundation, for my annual needs with just, using my own, making my own in-house.
That's
But,
too cool.
and again, obviously, if you're partial, if you're already using wax, if you're using plastic, it'd be such a paradigm shift. You'd probably lose your hair and go insane.
Yeah.
But
Too late.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking too, because all mine are like, I mean, I kind of just went that way, which I've only got a couple hundred colonies, but it's all just the groove top, groove bottom bars,
Yep.
So what do you have
Yep.
to use how do you pin it in there?
Yeah, so I forget, I'm so bad with names in the last few days. Whoever the author of 50 Years Amongst the Bees, he in one of his, I think it's in the middle of the book, he talks about how he makes these wooden shims. They're made out of pine. So 1/8 of an inch square. They're actually like sticks, 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch square, and they're about the height that I think it's not 7 3/4 inches, whatever sits right inside a deep frame or a medium. Actually, in the mediums, we didn't even use them. But I made these sticks made out of white pine, and then you just take a whole big vat of them and drop them in liquid wax. Let them simmer for like an hour or so, and then you just start plugging those like onto the foundation, like right in the middle of the frame.
Yep.
And that's actually, hang on, let me grab one real quick.
Okay.
I just got to get in the other room.
Okay. It was
Are you there, Cory?
Yeah, it was CC Miller.
DC Miller, yeah, that's right.
I
So,
cheated and Googled it.
So there's
Dang, that looks awesome.
you got the cross wires and this little, this is all that you have for vertical support.
Yeah,
But, yeah, this is it, man. It's wonderful.
that's too
piece of-
cool. That looks
Yeah.
really sharp. So are those wires embedded into the foundation, or does it just
Yep.
Is it really?
Yep, we embed them.
Whenever you roll
Yeah.
it through there?
No, just with Kelly, before Kelly was bought out by Man Lake, they have that electric embedder. So you just
Yeah.
hook it up to a 12 volt transformer.
Informs it.
Exactly. You just hit the button on them and let it sit there for like a 1 second, and it just zaps it right into the wax.
That's awesome. Man, those
Yeah.
look sharp.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of work. That's my hope.
Yeah.
It's so fun. I mean, it's just so much fun. If I had a year where there was so much going on, I didn't have time to do it. Obviously, would resort to buying in foundation. But this year I had the luxury. It's like every year I make most of the equipment anyway. So it's like, why not just make the foundation and see if I can do that too. But it was just so much fun. So I encourage anybody out there who's like on the fence about making their own foundation, just to dive in, man. It's a lot of fun.
I could see myself doing that in the future, but it kind of like what you said, with the day job and whatnot, it
Oh,
just
yeah.
comes down to time. Not only I hate to say it, like not only was I using plastic foundation, but I got to where I wouldn't even put my own frames together. I would just order them on the pallet
Oh,
already
yeah.
put together just because,
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, time. Yeah, no, I hear you. It's a legit thing. If you don't have the time, you got to do what you need to do.
Yeah, but I'm ready to reverse that trend in the future and make more time. Not
Yeah.
be so time based on it, but we'll see. I'm still working on that. Like you said, I'll know when the time's right.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
from
gonna
what
be,
I can see, it looks like you're doing a good job, so keep up the good work.
it seems sustainable, like you said, and I want to be in a smart financial position to where if I get knocked off my horse, I can climb back on it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
not hang myself because, at times like before I paid off student loans and stuff, or had a vehicle payment and had a house payment and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
But
think that's
we're gradually
it's incredibly wise to, get the foundation set and then build upon that. So like, yeah, getting your debt load down to a minimum, something reasonable that you feel like you can live with if something went awry. If you had a bad year with bees, you could still do okay. But yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. That's my mindset. It's the same thing. And I'm at the point. I mean, the fascinating thing where I'm at, like with my journey with being a beekeeper, is like my truck's paid off. I got a 3/4 ton pickup with a flatbed. That thing's paid for. I got this building we put up in 2016. That'll be paid off this year. So it's like, I'm doing. That's the thing. It's like, oh, I want to just like, I'm not trying to boast. I just want to make it known, like all this stuff that it can happen, and it's like I don't, this is it's happening by the blood, sweat, and tears of working with bees, and the productivity with bees. So I just think I need to kind of like push that out there to people to let them know that, yeah, you can do it. You got to be, like you said, you couldn't do it if you got a lot of debt, if you're not good with money, if you needed to pay yourself, 6 figures, you couldn't do it, from the beginning, unless you have, you got to figure out what you got it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's why your name gets thrown around so much too, is people look up to you because you have, made a living off of it. And I do love it that you're transparent, you know what I mean? Because like you said, some people are just constantly, bluffing, and they're just never really forthright with information. And I think that's why, your name gets thrown around a lot, just because you are a skilled beekeeper and you're totally killing it with raising your own queens, and you know what I mean, being responsible and being aware. But I just appreciate you talking with me too, and just sharing about it, because I know some people would like to hear, well, that's the thing, you hear, oh my gosh, Troy lost bees. That's all you hear, to where at least now, like, you can talk about it and encourage people, and, elaborate on a plan to get out of it. Or like we said, just raising a ton of queens out of what you've got left, and, how quickly you can look back on it and realize.
Well, my dad would always say, you ride the horse till it tips over, and you can't prop it back up anymore, so it's like, I think that's the thing people need to understand too. It's like, this is a process. It's not the end until you, at least with bees in a sense, or at least until you die. But, it's not, as a beekeeper, it's not over till you say it's over, or financially you don't have the means. But, you just keep, and you're never going to be, the work is never going to be done. There's always going to be more to do. And you're only good as last, you're only as good as last. What's the old adage? Well, you can never rest on your laurels. You're only as good as last season. And every season you start back at zero. So, that's why, again, after last year, I sat around thinking, well, if I wanted to get out of this, this is a perfect place to do it. I could just I could sell all the equipment, and it's obviously there's not too many live bees, so I wouldn't get top dollar for most of it, but I could, at least liquidate it and get out of it and go find a job somewhere. But I was thinking, like, why the hell would I want to do that?
Exactly.
There's no fun.
Don't do
There's no fun to be had anywhere else.
I mean,
I thought about it for like I thought that way for like half a second. And I was like, no, I'm gonna go. I'm giving it a go, man.
You know, take
It's
it
like I'm
from the
still,
dude. Take it from the dude that still reports to a day job, man. If you can just keep going and just don't quit, you know, and regain yourself, do it definitely.
I had a good friend, like a mentor of mine in the lumber industry when I was selling, lumber. And when I first met him, he goes, Troy, when I'm done with you, you're going to be unemployable. And I go, what do you mean by that, Rob? He goes, you won't be able to do anything else. You won't want to work anywhere else. You'll be unemployable. And it's like,
Yeah.
I find the same thing, same thing with bees. Like as long as I got just a few colonies of bees, I'm unemployable, man. Like
Yeah.
man, it's just like, I'm gonna make it go.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I've worked in transportation and logistics and, you know, different jobs like that. And like I feel like I'm pretty good at it. You know, I've seen a lot of angles, not a lot surprises me, but I'm just not into it. You know, like I'm just getting tired of it. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Some of my buddies, you know, if they pursued their passion, you know, as their day job, it took a little bit of magic away from it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it's a catch
Yeah,
22.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, if you got that initial passion, that's the thing that's going to keep you. Like, I remember like when I started doing this, I was out in my barn, I'd be out making supers like in the middle of the winter, it'd be like 10 degrees out and I'd be out hammering supers together. And it just baffles me that I actually did what I did early on.
Yeah.
I had so much, I was in my early 20s. I had so much drive, to be like, to make this work. I was so excited, like I got to get all my equipment ready, and it's had so much fun with the whole notion of thinking. I had this dream of like, this is what I want to do. And I've seen people do it and I want to emulate that. And here I am today. It's like, man, it's 20 degrees out there. I'm not going to go cut wood. I'm not going to go out in the wood shop and sit over a table saw in that type of weather. I'm going to wait till it's 40 degrees out before I get out there and start cutting, ripping stuff up. But anyways, that initial, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's the thing with it. It's seasonal though. Because like, even if you work your butt off, you know what I mean, through the spring and summer, like you get a break, like with a day job, I take off work I'll take a little bit of a, vacay or a little time off. But a lot of times I take off work to work bees, So it'll be nice to be more balanced to where I can just work hard seasonally and then, burn firewood or something.
You know what the cool thing about it is, man? Like I've only worked, I haven't worked a wide plethora of jobs in my life thus far. Outside of in high school, I worked at a grocery store stocking shelves, and then out of high school, I went right into the lumber industry. Learned how to grade lumber, and then I was a salesman, so I got in sales, and then I'm a beekeeper. So it's like, I don't have a huge, background of like working here, working there, knowing how to, feel, just knowing different industries and all the ins and outs or whatever. But I can tell you right now, I still am blown away by, those days you're out working bees. You're busy. You're it's a beautiful day. You got a frame. You're looking for whatever, frame of bees, and you just look up, and it's like, it's beautiful out, man. And you just stop and take it in. You're just like, man, we live in such a beautiful world. This is such, everything around us is so beautiful to behold. And here I am working with this creature that is just so fascinating. I have yet, every year it's just like that never gets old.
I love it.
So if you feel that way, then I can only encourage you, man. Keep doing what you're doing and you'll get there.
I think so too. And that's the thing as well, is like I've, got the bee shop and I'll have it paid off in a couple years. I've still got to run water and power out there. I'm waiting on some more dirt work to get done, but I'll have that paid off. I'll have my honey extraction line paid off. All my, I won't owe anything on the business, and it'd be established. So I think I can make it work, and if I don't have to work 40 hours a week here, I can obviously produce more, and then when I know when my time off is, and then do some running around, see the world.
Exactly.
And I'm super glad to hear you got back in the game too and getting after it. I think your plan's excellent, and I don't know, it does me good to talk to you and hear everything's working out well and it's back on course.
Yeah, no, we went out 2 weeks ago just to kind of get an idea for how the colonies look. The production colonies look pretty good. Actually, probably one of the best years. Obviously, I treated a percentage of them with, because they were still packaged. Pretty much had packaged queens, but a good chunk of them were just requeened with my stock and were not treated. And everything just looks great. And then all the nukes, some of the nukes look a little bit, weak, but most of them, I mean, it's just like I'll have enough bees to sell this spring to people, and just all it's like it looks to be a promising year. I'll be back up on top with having having probably I'd like to run around 300 colonies produce honey this year, and if I can, typically I need around 400 nukes and as if I don't have enough yards for 500, and I'm not all that excited to go out and look for another yard to put nukes in, so I'm just going to probably cap it out at, if we can run 400 nukes and have 2 mating yards that are that's a cool thing. Right where I'm at, I'm on the river valley here, the Connecticut River, and it's pretty isolated, right in around. I have 2 mating yards that are about a mile apart from each other, and there's 2 mainly because of the size. I have, let's see, there's 54 away. They're deep supers, like what Michael Palmer uses, Kirk Webster. They're the deep supers that are divided into quarters. So I have 50 of those deeps. What's that? That's 200. Was it 200? Yeah, 200.
Yep.
200, so I could run 200 queens through them, or 200 cells every 8 days or every 16 days. I'm kind of bouncing from one mating yard to the next, but
That's
in and
awesome.
amongst those 2 mating yards, I can saturate the valley. I got like 100 drone mothers, right
Yeah.
there, just doing their thing. So it's a really fun place to do this work, because it is easily to saturate an area, and just because of the layout of the land, like there's no real big commercial presence, other than just
Nice.
me, for the
That's
time
awesome.
being, in a sense. So it's really fun to do all this.
Yeah. I'm pretty isolated out here too. There's a few people that keep bees, but not really any that I know of, bigger commercial guys that are sitting close. But
Mhm.
I may have to open up another yard. I've got I bought a bunch of new stuff too that I dipped and branded the other day, and I'm kind of at capacity at the other 3 yards, so I'll probably pick another spot. Like you said, I'm not really overly excited about it, but I've got a good friend that's got quite a bit of property that's offered a couple times, and he texted me the other
Yep.
day, so I think we'll figure out another spot and try it out.
Yeah, go
Hopefully
for
it's
it, man.
good.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, beekeepers always get like the dregs of any sort of property. Hey, where can I put the bees? Well, put them over there, in the floodplain, or put them over there. You gotta.
Exactly. Man. Well, Troy, I won't keep you. I know you're probably looking forward to getting some family time in, but I can't thank you enough for catching up with me. I really enjoyed it, and good to hear from you. And we'll have to catch up again here soon. Maybe we can catch up at the end of the season or something and see how things are going.
Yeah, no, I thoroughly enjoy these conversations, and it's always great talking with you, somebody who's, I feel like I can I can identify with a lot, that you're doing, and
Absolutely.
it's really easy to talk to you and just kind of be honest and open about stuff. So yeah, it's always a pleasure talking, and I hope that your season goes well too, Cory. I hope you have a phenomenal year, and that you have stuff that just exceeds your expectations when it comes to, what you can do and what comes of your bees, and just keep up the good work with what you're doing with your breeding program, man, because it's like you said, there's not, at least from my limited view of the realm of beekeeping, there's not a lot, it doesn't appear to be a lot of people doing what you're doing. So keep up the good work.
I think it'll spread. I think after, which I just put my stuff out on YouTube too. I'm pretty transparent about what I do. I think, with people like us, you know, maybe setting an example or being an industry leader, I think that the next generation will come up and do even greater things. They'll take what we've figured out. Hopefully, we'll have some advances. Maybe won't just be the same old Langstroth hives and old smokers. Maybe we can. I hope to be able to change the game. Basically, that's kind of my goal.
Yeah.
I think it can be done.
Well, let's work hard to see if it can be.
Troy, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Cory.
We'll catch up soon.
Will do, man.
All right.
See
See
you,
ya.
Cory.